Welcome to our discussion about Cambodia's evolving political landscape, a fascinating blend of rapid economic growth, reconfigured political patronage, and shifting international dynamics.
Absolutely. It's such a tangled narrative, isn't it?
Right, exactly. Take, for instance, the period marked by the so-called Cambodian Spring of 2013. The mood then was electric with change, as millions of young, first-time voters, all coming from a country transformed by nearly 20 years of GDP booms, hit the polls.
Yep.
People were demanding an overhaul from a government that had clung to power for decades.
It's like the economy was booming, but at the same time, the inequality and entrenched patron-client systems were glaring pretty much everywhere, isn't it?
Exactly. While the country beamed with new construction and rising incomes, the same old networks of political loyalty were, still holding sway. This duality, the glitter of modernity alongside the grim realities of displacement, like those mass evictions in Phnom Penh, really encapsulates the paradox.
And then there's the broader historical context, like how Cambodia shifted after the Cold War, what's often described as the end of history, that moment when the Paris Peace Agreements of 1991 and the UN's UNTAC came in to, scaffold a new beginning.
Right. The Paris Agreements promised a transition into democracy and an era of human rights, but in practice, it ended up being more a rebranding exercise for the ruling powers. The CPP, now rebranded and repositioned, used those international hopes while continuing to govern behind closed doors with its old patronage network. It was almost a, facade democracy.
So you're saying that while Cambodia was seen as a poster child for a New World Order, internally it was still clinging to personalized power?
Exactly. Think of it like a modern makeover. External symbols change, like, for instance, the removal of communist imagery for more, Buddhist iconography, but the underlying structures kept operating, very much like they always had. One could argue it was a cosmetic shift rather than a substantive one.
I'm curious, though, what do you make of the role of the international community in all this? It seems like there was a time when Western donors and the UN were really expecting Cambodia to evolve into a bastion of human rights, but that didn't really happen.
Yeah, that's one of the most intriguing aspects. Initially, after the Cold War, there was abundant optimism. Cambodia was expected to, so to speak, transcend its traumatic past and fully embrace the liberal democratic ideals of human rights. However, in reality, the international community's leverage was somewhat superficial. The CPP managed to accept foreign aid while shunning any real intervention in its internal affairs. It's like being fed from a trough while still dancing to one's own tune.
Right. And then later on, you see opposition leaders like Sam Rainsy and Kem Sokha trying to harness that international goodwill to challenge the incumbent regime. But even that strategy has its contradictions, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Rainsy, for instance, managed to tap into the language of human rights and international norms, yet he also clung to a strong sense of Khmer nationalism. His criticisms of Vietnam, like referring to decades of sour Vietnamese soup, highlight a complex interplay between progressive appeals and persistent ethnic rivalries.
Yep.
It's, almost like a double-edged sword.
And what about the influence of China? That really seems to have shifted the game in recent years.
Oh man, yes. China's rise as Cambodia's chief foreign patron is a game changer. While Western donors were stepping back, China was stepping in with billions of dollars, investing heavily in everything from infrastructure projects to hotels. And the Chinese approach of non-interference contrasted sharply with Western conditionality on human rights and governance reforms.
It almost sounds like Cambodia is caught in a geopolitical tug-of-war, with local imperatives on one side and these massive international influences on the other.
Exactly. And, that tug-of-war creates a paradoxical situation where domestic issues like land grabs and the displacement of the poor continue unabated, even as the country projects an image of stability and modernity on the international stage.
So, do you think this mix of local and global factors can eventually lead to real political change in Cambodia, or is it more likely to just, reinforce the entrenched power structures?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. On one hand, the 2013 election, with its unprecedented opposition turnout and public demonstrations, hints at a growing desire among ordinary Cambodians for change. On the other hand, the same era saw violent crackdowns and strategic maneuvers by Hun Sen to preserve his grip on power. It's a bit like a simmering pot that could boil over or continue to simmer indefinitely.
But don't you think that the very mass protests and the public outcry might eventually push the government to, commit to reforms?
I wish it were that simple. Look at the aftermath of the 2013 election. The opposition did manage to secure some high-profile positions in parliamentary commissions, but soon after, disagreements and even arrests pointed to a hardening of the regime. It's almost like a temporary window of opportunity rather than a lasting revolution.
That's a solid point. It reminds me of the tension between symbolic change and substantive change, where the dramatic rhetoric of reform stands in stark contrast to the slow pace of actual improvements in human rights.
Exactly, and this gap is, so evident in Cambodia. The international human rights rhetoric, the global symbols of reform, like celebrating International Human Rights Day, mask the fact that many Cambodians still struggle with, basic survival and local disputes over land and resources.
Right. I also find it interesting how the discourse of human rights itself is bifurcated in this context. On one hand, you have local, tactical appeals, like demanding higher wages or better working conditions, while on the other, there's the grand, universal doctrine of human rights imposed from above.
Yes, precisely. And academic voices like Stephen Hopgood suggest that the era of exporting a universal human rights regime may be ending with the rise of multipolarity, especially with powers like China challenging the old Western-led order. This really throws a wrench into any neat narrative of inevitable liberal democracy.
So, in your opinion, what is the future trajectory for Cambodia? Are we heading towards more institutional reforms, or is it all destined to fall back into the same patronage politics and charismatic strongmen?
Honestly, it's a mixed bag. While there's a palpable energy among younger voters and local activists demanding real change, the established system is remarkably resilient. It's almost like Cambodia has perfected the art of, selective modernization, adopting the trappings of reform while keeping the core power structures intact.
That is, of course, unsettling because it means the promise of a more open, accountable government might remain out of reach, at least in terms of the Western democratic model.
Right. And let's not forget that these challenges are compounded by, internal divisions as well. For instance, the narrative around key historical milestones like January 7th and October 23rd remains deeply polarized. Depending on who you ask, they represent liberation or merely a facade masking the continuation of old conflicts.
I do wonder, though, does this polarization help to energize civil society, or does it just serve the interests of the ruling elites by distracting from their policy failures?
That's a fair critique. In truth, the polarization is a double-edged sword. It galvanizes certain segments of the populace, but it also allows leaders to manipulate nationalist sentiments to deflect attention from deep structural issues like corruption and inequality. I mean, while protests and rallies can be powerful, they often end up as, symbolic gestures rather than drivers of genuine reform.
Yep. And the reliance on international support by the opposition, despite its noble intent, seems at odds with a strong nationalist sentiment, doesn't it?
Exactly. Although that very contradiction is, at the heart of modern Cambodian politics. Opposition figures like Rainsy have cleverly used international appeals to highlight abuses while simultaneously courting nationalist rhetoric to rally local support. It's a delicate balance that, frankly, sometimes seems contradictory.
That dichotomy between outward appeals to global norms and inward traditional nationalist narratives really leaves us with a complex picture, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And when you add in the changing international environment, with the West's influence waning and China's rise, the narrative becomes even more multifaceted. Cambodia, as a result, is navigating a territory where neither international liberalism nor traditional power politics can claim total sway.
Right? It's as if Cambodia is, caught in a historical limbo between the promise of a modern rights-respecting state and the harsh realities of a regime that has weathered decades using very old-school tactics.
Exactly so. And this tension, this almost palpable dissonance between the global expectations and the local realities, suggests that the future will likely be a gradual evolution rather than a dramatic revolution. There's a growing, albeit cautious, sense that power might eventually respond to the demands of a more informed and engaged populace.
Yep. Still, one can't help but wonder, is it really possible for a system so deeply ingrained in personalized power and patronage to ever fully transform into something more, democratic in the Western sense?
Well, I'd argue that if we redefine democracy to mean a system that is more just and responsive to the everyday needs of the people, then alternative pathways to change might emerge. It might not be the Western model, but perhaps one that's uniquely Cambodian.
That's a compelling point. In the end, it seems that the future of Cambodia will be determined primarily by its people, even if external influences and entrenched systems continue to cast long shadows.
Exactly. And while the road ahead is shrouded in uncertainty and potential conflict, the growing engagement of the citizenry offers a glimmer of hope. A hope that, even after decades of turbulence, real, meaningful change might finally be on the horizon.
Yep. Well, this has been such an engaging conversation about a truly complex topic. It reminds me that history is rarely a straight line, but more a series of loops and turns. In Cambodia's case, loops between local realities and global expectations.
Indeed. And as we continue to watch how Cambodia navigates these turbulent times, it will be fascinating to see if these dynamic tensions will eventually lead to a more inclusive and responsive political order, or if they will reinforce the same old power struggles.
Right. I guess only time will truly tell. Thanks for walking through this maze of historical, domestic, and international implications with me. It's been really enlightening.
My pleasure. Thanks for joining in the exploration of Cambodia's political evolution. Until next time, keep questioning and looking deeper into the layers of our global narratives.